Welcome to the Littleton Chambers podcast.
I'm Mia. And I'm Carla. And we are both pupils at Littleton Chambers, about to become tenants. And before we do that, we thought, why not sit down and talk a little bit about our experience with Littleton and Pupillage. So why don't we start at the very beginning and talk about applications. Now, for me, that was about 2 years ago. When did you apply, Mia?
I applied last year, although I think the process is still the same for both years. There are 3 stages to the application process. So there's a first round interview, followed by a mini pupillage stage if you get to that point, which also includes an assessed piece of work that you'll be doing in Chambers, and then a final round interview.
And I will say, it sounds a bit daunting that it's 3 stages when I think it's different with every set, but it's normally 2. But I personally really enjoyed the mini pupillage stage because that's where I really fell in love with the set, because the people were so open and so welcoming, and it was in that mini pupillage stage that I decided if I get an offer, I would love to come to Littleton.
Yeah, I have to say I really agree. It wasn't until really the mini pupillage stage that Littleton became my top choice. Because while I was here, I really felt the sense of, people are so friendly and nice and doing really excellent work. And I think you get the vibe of a place better when you're physically there and you're meeting people. So it was only really when I was here that I felt strongly that I wanted to be here.
And also, it is also, it gave me the impression that I had the chance to put my best foot forward, because it wasn't just a snap shot of your abilities in like a 15-minute interview and then your life is being decided on that. I really felt it was a well-rounded experience. I really had the opportunity to show why I think I'd be a good barrister.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think it is a comprehensive process with 3 stages, and in my case, it was the only place I applied that had 3 stages. But I do think that, as you probably gathered from what we both think, the mini pupillage stage was pivotal in the decision making for us about where we felt we wanted to be and belonged, and that ended up being a big draw ultimately.
Absolutely. And yeah, as we said, there's a first round interview before and a second round interview after that, and we can't tell you too much about that, obviously, but what I will say is I always felt they were quite fair. You might come into first round interviews and you go away and you think that went awful or that went brilliant. I went away each time thinking, you know what, I've given it my best shot, and I felt it was a very fair interview. So neither positive or negative. I just felt that I was able to say what I needed to say.
Next, we're going to talk about the structure of pupillage. The first thing to say, if it wasn't already obvious to those listening and watching, Littleton is a specialist set, and its core areas are employment, commercial and sports law. Pupillage has 4 seats. You have a different supervisor for each of those seats, so they're all 3 months long. And at the end of each of those seats, you'll have an end of seat handover between your current and next supervisor. So the 3 of you will sit down together, and the supervisor you just had will tell you effectively how they think it's gone, and you'll recap what you've covered in that seat and work out what needs to be covered next in the seat that follows, so that your next supervisor has got an idea of what you have and haven't seen. So it's a very transparent process, and you are there for that meeting. So that's your opportunity to find out how it's going. And personally, I found that a very reassuring part of the year.
And now going from the reassuring bit to the slightly less reassuring bit, you obviously, as Mia said, are going to do work for your supervisors primarily in those seats. However, there are also formal assessments. In our year, there were 6 formal assessments. It's a mix of advocacy, so oral assessments and written assessments. And every single pupil, while they have different supervisors, they get the same assessments at the same time. And again, it is transparent. You will get a mark, you will get written feedback, and you'd also sometimes get oral feedback. And because, if that's not reassuring enough, there's also work that you do for other members of Chambers that tends to start gradually. So in your first seed, you don't do a massive amount of that, but moving into your second and specifically third seed, other members of Chambers from all levels, but normally your supervisor's level or above, will come to you with written pieces of work that they have gotten. So it can be really anything in the practice areas, and they give them to you to see how you're doing, and you also get a feedback form for that with a mark and written feedback. So it is transparent all throughout the process. If you are doing well, if you're on track, you will know that, and if you're not, you will also know that, and people will talk to you and they'll make sure to tell you what you need to change to get you back on track. So that I found was really helpful. So we were never in the dark. But there are 3 different ways that you can be assessed, and they're all coming together in a tenancy decision.
Yeah, so we have our tenancy decision in early to mid-July. So by the time you get to that stage, a lot of information has been gathered about you. So each of your supervisors will write a report which reflects effectively the conversation you had in your end of seat handover. They will write that report. You don't get to see a copy of that, but that is in the tenancy pack that's produced at the end of the year. And as we've already talked about, all of the formal assessments will have a feedback form attached to them with marks. That will also go in there, as will the feedback forms from other members of Chambers that you've done work for. And on average, people tend to have between 8 and 15 of those feedback forms in addition to the formal assessments. So quite a lot of information throughout the year, which sounds daunting in terms of the numbers, but personally was hugely reassuring, just because by the time we were approaching the tenancy decision date, of course you're going to be a little bit nervous, but because of the number of assessments you've done and the marks that you've had back, you will have a good idea of how the year has gone, and there's been plenty of chance to see that develop over time. So I didn't feel as nervous as I might have if I hadn't had all that information at my fingertips.
And truly everyone is on your side and wants you to do well, and that was again something that became very clear from the get-go. If there was anything that you haven't done yet, or maybe that you didn't perform your best at, people will come to you and tell you, look, this is how you perform better next time, this is all the things that you can do. So hypothetically, if you had a really bad mark, then that wouldn't sort of just be left to fester, that would then be addressed immediately. So now going into our experience during the pupillage year, certainly for me, starting out, every single thing I was doing was completely new. I've never done it before. I haven't seen it before. So that was a very steep learning curve starting out. But as we've touched on before, everyone has been absolutely phenomenal, very welcoming, and just very supportive. So it made that really difficult experience very, very easy to transition into, because whenever you had a question, someone was always going to be there, and you could really ask a stupid question and they would always help you and support you and make sure that you feel welcome and supported. So that made a very difficult year, and especially a very difficult start, a lot easier to palate. And that's not just the barristers, it's really everyone in Chambers, it's the clerks, the staff. And for example, with events in Chambers from day one as pupils, we were sort of basically looped in, and we participated and were included from the get-go, if that was networking events or outreach events, anything from, breakfast series about the areas that we do in Chambers where we could sit in, get a free breakfast and just make notes from the talks, or networking events with solicitors. I remember one time we went bowling with sports solicitors, and we were there just like everyone else. So that was a really good thing to know that everyone was there to have your back from the get-go.
I have to say my favourite thing about Littleton is its culture. It was the thing that made them my first choice when I was applying. As I mentioned before, during the mini pupillage stage, you kind of get that taste of it, and yeah, that was the reason I wanted to come here, the kind of key reason, as well as the areas and the type of work. But the people you're around and the general kind of collegiate environment makes a real difference to how happy you're going to be in a place. And I've honestly loved being here this year, and I'm really happy to be staying. Everyone is super nice here. You'll hear lots of people say it. Obviously, we're biased, but I really feel that. And we were always included quite early on from attending events and meeting clients, and you were given every opportunity to get stuck in with that kind of thing, as well as with the type of work that we were doing. And for me, that's been a big highlight of the year.
Absolutely. And maybe we can break down our individual years a little bit for you without going into too much detail. But for me, my first seat was, as I said, loads of new things. I think I've seen many different areas. I've done commercial work, I've done international offshore work, so specifically DAFC and ADGM work, which is Dubai and Abu Dhabi. Then partnership and LLP work, which I've never done before, and a lot of high court employment work, which is contractual work in the employment context. And really every single piece of work I've done was very new, and it was good to see that many different areas from the beginning, and really make sure that, you know, I was in the mindset that whenever I get a new piece of work, I really will not have seen it before. And in my second seat, it was, you know, a continuation of commercial and high court employment, but a bit more specialized, so less areas of law, but a bit more in depth. So I did a bit more on longer cases. So I had less cases than in my first seat, but I was included in it to a higher degree. Went to court a little bit. I think I went to the Court of Appeal. I went along to the Court of Appeal for a hearing, and I went to an injunction hearing in my second seat. And then in my third seat, it was very, very commercial, and I was very lucky to see a 3-week trial in the Chancery Division just before Pupillage decision. So that was a really, really good experience to see a trial preparation and then the full length of a trial, and get to see different barristers and their advocacy experience in submissions and cross-examination, which was really, really a highlight of Pupillage. And to see just the entirety of it as well was a great experience. So that would be for me.
My overview of the year, my supervisors, for the most part, all do quite a big mixture of different things. So my year, I have seen the full mixture of the core areas that we do, which has been great. I really feel that all of them have got different personalities in a way. So that's been lovely to see. I've done work in the employment tribunals right from the first day up to the present on all kinds of different issues. I've seen a number of investigations this year, which is a kind of specialist area for Chambers, which lots of people might not be familiar with. I found that super interesting. So I've seen maybe 4 or 5 investigations this year and worked on a couple as well. I've seen High Court work, I've been to the Court of Appeal, I've seen all kinds of things this year. I've worked on sports arbitrations, and I have even worked on a sports pro bono case in recent months as well. And in my own right, I was sent off to do a Chancery insolvency case in May, I want to say. So it's quite early on in second six. I was sent off to do a case of my own for the first time, which is very exciting. So I've seen a big range of stuff this year, which has been lovely. And as we said before, you always have that chance to say, actually, I'd like to see a bit more of this, or I'd like to see a bit more of that, or I haven't had a chance to practice this yet, and it makes me feel a little bit nervous about doing it on my own as a tenant, so I want to have a chance to practice before that. So that's been great. There's always been a chance to deal with those things as the year has gone on, and that's part of the feature of there being such focus on training and development while you're here as a pupil. So for me, that's been great.
And maybe also on that topic, so Mia just mentioned that she was able to go to court in May. So we do have a practicing second six at Littleton. However, that is not the emphasis of the second six. So we still have the assessments, we still have other pieces of work for members of chambers, which is the core of what you're being assessed on for tenancy. And while if there is a case coming up, you do get to go to court in your own right, it's not going to be every day of the week or even like a regular occurrence. It's going to be maybe once or twice, possibly before the tenancy decision. So that's something to bear in mind as well. It won't be one of the practicing second six in which you really are on your feet for most of the time and doing your own work. It's very much a continuation of the assessments that you have been doing before.
Last, we're going to talk about the fourth seat and what follows after the tenancy decision has been made in July. Partly because the purpose of your fourth seat becomes slightly different after that point. Where we are now, the purpose of these remaining months, weeks I should say, are to prepare you for tenancy, and that transition is something that happens quite gradually. So now, increasingly, the three of us are being asked to take on paid work. So you'll get more calls from the clerks asking if you can help somebody with something. And that gives you a chance, and under your supervisor's watchful eye, to manage your own diary a little bit more increasingly. So we're seeing things go into the diary for the autumn time. And working out how you're going to balance that kind of thing and make those judgment calls about how long do I think something's going to take, and can I fit it in, and those sorts of judgment calls you're going to need to make on your own, as well as preparing you for other things, so giving you all the information you need to become a fully fledged tenant in your own right. So I think it's worth just saying that the purpose becomes slightly different.
Yeah, exactly. So you're not going to be working with your supervisor primarily, and as Mia said, there's not going to be any assessments anymore. It's more so that the supervisor helps you. I always like to call like how to barrister a little bit, because it's not just the substance of the work, it's also everything around managing your practice and having everything else set up and ready. And there's sadly not like a brochure on how to barrister, so it's very nice to have that support from the supervisors who just say, look, in my experience, this is what you need, and this is what I've done, or maybe this is something I wish I would have known at that point in my career. So that really is the next few weeks, or the weeks after tenancy decision. Also, everyone is really encouraging you to take a holiday, so that's nice.
Yes,
everyone I meet is asking why I'm in chambers, so I'm not sure what to make of that. But it is a bit of a different situation. So it's really just your well-being. Your well-being is hopefully always taken into account, but sort of making sure you get a good rest and a good break, because I certainly felt that I needed a break after sort of all the work going into the tenancy decision. So that's part of your fourth seat rather, and then just making sure that when you start practice on day one, you're really set up for success and everyone's there.
I think on the note of the transition as well, we're speaking now in August and our pupillages end the last day of September. So we've now been told who our clerking teams are, and we will all meet them and sit down with them properly in September before pupillage ends. So there's a chance to put all of those kind of preparatory steps in place before the actual day you become a tenant. So there's lots of prep that goes on in the background to kind of prepare you gradually for that, so it's not just a kind of drop off a cliff, which for me is hugely reassuring.
No, exactly. And as I said, because there isn't really any structure imposed in that sense, I feel like now with training to become a barrister, the bar course element is very structured, and even the pupillage is very structured, not just from your chambers or bar course provider, but from the inns and the BSB and the bar council. But that really isn't the case for when you start practice. I think that's the point, but everyone decided you are now an adult and you somehow know how to be a barrister and be self-employed. And, obviously that's not necessarily the case. So I really appreciate that support from Chambers to help set you up for success going forward, even though there isn't a formal structure in place, unlike with pupillage, and I said the bar course element. So hopefully that is going to make that transition smooth, because that is a very different transition. Your supervisors are always people that I felt were slightly protecting you from the world, because they would say, you know, this is too much, or this is what you need to do, and, you know, you're not going to take on this piece of work. And they've been shielding you a little bit from the realities of, you know, other barristers, solicitors, clerks, people wanting things from you. But come October 1st for us, we don't have that nice protective shield anymore. So giving us the skills to fend for ourselves is the fourth seat's purpose.
Well, hopefully we've given you some useful information there, and I'm sure you can find more elsewhere. But that's been the year.
Thank you very much for listening to us.
Thank you.
This podcast was brought to you by Littleton Chambers. For more information on our barristers and clerks, please visit littletonchambers.co.uk.